If you're new to Unity, this tutorial should help you learn how to spawn objects into your game using C# code. In the last video, we wrote a short script that let us move all of our pipes towards our player. Now, let's take our game one step further and create infinite levels by dynamically spawning in all our pipes. In Unity, the first thing we'll do is create a new script. So I'll right-click on Scripts, go up to Create, and left-click on C# Script. Because this script will be responsible for infinitely spawning all the pipes into our level, let's rename it to Pipe Spawner. I'll simply go down to our new Pipe Spawner script, left click, and drag it right under our Pipe Mover script. You may remember this pipes object was the parent for all the pipes that we manually duplicated and positioned to make our level in the last video. Fortunately, our Pipe Mover script here won't change at all. But because we'll be spawning in every pipe, we'll need to save one of these pipes and remove the rest. So while we're here, let's take one of these pipes and save it as an asset that we can reference later. To save any object in Unity, we can convert it into something called a prefab. Prefabs have many uses in Unity, but we'll focus on how we can use them to create our level using code. To create a prefab, all we need to do is left click on one of our pipes here and drag it down into our assets folder. So I'll left click on pipe and just drag it right on top of assets. As soon as we let go, the object appears right here in our assets folder. This is the saved prefab. You may have also noticed that the original object we dragged into our assets folder turns blue. This is because this object is now connected to our saved prefab. Now that we've saved this pipe prefab in our assets folder outside of our scene, we can actually remove all of our pipes. So I'll simply left click, go down to my bottom pipe, just hold shift, click, and it'll select everything. With all these selected, I'll just right click and left click on delete. Okay, now that we have our saved prefab, let's head into our pipe spawner script by double left clicking on it. So I'll go into my scripts folder and find the pipe spawner and double left click. As usual, let's first clean up our script by removing the first two namespaces up here and our start method. However, this time we'll start off by creating our first method. Similar to the variables we looked at in previous videos, all we need to create a new method is to specify what type we want, then give it a name. To do this, let's go below our update method. I'll space down a couple times, and I'll type the word void as our method's type, followed by the name, which we'll call spawn pipe. And then open and close parentheses and open and close curly brackets. A void method type just means it won't return any values when we tell it to run. Any code in here will execute, but that's it. And that's all we need. Of course, it doesn't do anything yet. To make it do something, let's type debug.log in our new method so it will post the message spawn pipe in our Unity console. Just like that. Finally, to get this method to run, we need to call it somehow. The way we'll do that is by simply copying and pasting our method name into the update method. So I'll left click and select spawn pipe, including the parentheses. I'll hit Controller Command C to copy it. Now up here in our update method, all I need to do with that copied is hit Controller Command V to paste it. And at the very end, be sure to add a semicolon. Great, be sure to save, and let's go into Unity to test this out. Back in Unity, let's make sure our console tab is selected. Now when I go up here and click play, you'll see in our console, our spawn pipe message appears once for every single frame. Great. Now that we can confirm our spawn method is working correctly, let's head back into our script and get things ready to spawn in some pipes. Since Unity's update method executes on every single frame, our spawn pipe message is being sent way too fast. If we spawn pipes this quickly, our game would probably crash. So before we can use our 3D pipe models, let's first get more control over how fast they can spawn. To do this, let's click into our spawn pipe method, and we'll create an if statement to check if it's time to spawn a new pipe. Inside our if statement's parentheses, let's type time.time to get the current time. Next, type a greater than symbol. Now, we need a way to track our current spawn time and then tell Unity when it should spawn again. To do this, let's create a new variable. The variable type we'll use is called a float. Float variables are good for storing time because they store number values with decimals. Because this float variable will change with every single spawn and update with the newest time, we'll name this variable current spawn time. Next, let's copy our current spawn time variable by hitting Controller Command C on your keyboard. Go down into our if statement, and on the right hand side of our greater than symbol, let's paste our variable current spawn time. You may remember by default a variable with no value assigned is set to 0. So the first time this if statement is run, time just needs to be greater than 0 to meet the criteria. To track and update the current spawn time, let's go into our if statement and paste our new variable again. Then let's assign it a value by typing equals. Then we'll get the current time by typing time.time. Then we'll add +2. This sets our current spawn time variable to the current time plus 2 seconds. Basically, we're just telling Unity to send our message spawn pipe every 2 seconds. And before I forget, you can see our debug.log is actually outside the if statement. That means it will still fire every single update. To make that fire only when this criteria is met, I'm going to highlight it, hit Controller Command X to cut it, and then I'll space down and hit Controller Command V to paste it within our if statement. I'll just clean up this little space to keep things looking clean. Perfect, let's be sure to save, and then we'll head back into Unity to test this out. When we click play, we should now see the spawn pipe message only appear every 2 seconds. You can tweak this speed however you like, but I recommend waiting until we start actually spawning the pipes. It'll just be easier to play test your game that way. I'll go ahead and hit stop. Now, we're finally ready to spawn in some 3D pipes. Let's head back into our script. To spawn a game object into our scene, we need to use something called Instantiate. This just means we want to create a new instance or copy of something. And the thing we'll create new instances of is the pipe prefab we just created in Unity. So let's go into the same method we're using to create our spawn pipe message and type the word instantiate, then open and close parentheses. The only other thing this needs to work is a game object. To pull in the prefab we just created, let's go to the top of our script and create a new variable. This time, we need to create a game object variable. So type game object, then we'll name it pipe prefab. To connect this variable with our prefab, we need to make it accessible within the Unity editor. In the last video, we learned about something called serialize field. You may remember all this does is allow us to see and change the variable within Unity. So I'll type open and close brackets, a space, and then type the word serialize field. Be sure to capitalize the S and the F, that does matter. Next, I'll take our pipe prefab variable, I'll double click on it to highlight it, hit Controller Command C to copy it, go down into the instantiate that we created a few seconds ago, and I'll just paste in our pipe prefab variable. Perfect, let's go ahead and hit save and head back into Unity. Back in Unity, let's make sure our pipes game object is selected because it has our pipe spawner script on it. And you should see the pipe prefab variable is now available for you to add something to it. You can see the type of thing it's looking for is a game object. I'll expand this just a bit so you can see it has nothing now, but it requires a game object to work correctly. And to attach our pipe prefab that we created a second ago, let's go into our assets again and left click on your pipe and simply drag it onto our game object slot here. When I let go, you can see our pipe prefab is now assigned to the pipe prefab variable. Okay, cool. That's technically all we need to spawn pipes. Let's test it by clicking the play button. You might not see anything exciting going on in your game view, but you should see the pipe spawning in your scene and in the hierarchy here. It's most likely spawning in the same spot that you first saved it as a prefab, and every new pipe just spawns on top of the last. If you don't see it here, no worries. As long as you can see it popping up in your hierarchy over here, you're good. We'll set a specific spawn location next. I'll go ahead and hit stop. You may notice all those game objects that were created by script have been removed. Next, to make our pipes spawn in a specific spot, we need to do a couple things. First, let's create a new 3D cube game object and rename it to spawn point. So I'll right click, go down to 3D object, and click on cube. Now with my cube game object selected, I'm just going to type the word spawn point. I'll also go up to my transform, right click and reset it so that it's here in my scene aligned with all my other stuff on the Z axis. This spawn point could technically be an empty game object, but the cube here just helps us better see where it is in our game world. Next, let's position it somewhere on the right edge of our camera's view. I'll bump this over to 15. Perfect, now that our spawn point is somewhere outside of our camera's view, let's head back into our script. Back in our pipe spawner script, let's create a new transform variable. You may remember the transform component handles position, rotation, and scale. I'll go to the far right of my pipe prefab variable and just hit enter. To add our transform variable, simply type transform as the type. Then I'll space and type the word spawn point. Next, just like we did for our game object variable up here, let's type serialize field so we can connect to it within Unity. Next, let's go down into the instantiate statement we wrote earlier. Inside the parentheses that has our pipe prefab variable, we need to add a few things. First, we'll set the position by creating a new vector3. To do that, I'll type a comma after my variable and just type the word new vector3, and then open and close parentheses. To get our spawn point position, simply type spawn point to get the variable, then dot position. You may notice we now have an error under our vector3. This is because it's looking for the x, y, and z positions. Technically, our spawn point.position has all three of those values, but certain versions of Unity won't accept this. So in order to make sure it works for your version, all we have to do is type .x for our spawn point.position's x value. Then I'll highlight my spawn point.position.x, hit Controller Command C to copy it, then Controller Command V to paste it, and I'll put y at the end instead of x. And then finally I'll paste it one more time and then put z at the end. So we've got our x, y, and z floats all set up in our new vector3. Now you may notice we're getting another error. This is because when we added position, we also need to set rotation. To keep the original rotation we used in our prefab, all we need to do is type quaternion.identity. This just pulls in the object's default rotation values. So I'll type a comma after our new vector3 and type the word quaternion.identity. Perfect. You should see our instantiate no longer has any errors. However, let's add one more thing to this instantiate. Unlike the pipes we positioned in the last video, our instantiated or spawned pipes weren't moving at all. To change this, all we need to do is type a comma, then the word transform. This sets each new instantiated pipe's parent to the same game object that our pipe spawner script is on. In this case, it's our pipes game object. And because our pipes game object also has our pipe mover script attached to it, they'll work together to spawn and move all of our pipes. And that's it. I'll save my script by hitting Control S, and I'll head back into Unity. Now back in Unity, let's click on our pipes game object here, and let's not forget to attach our spawn point variable. All we have to do is give it a transform, and obviously that transform will be this spawn point's position. So I'll go back and left click on spawn point, and I will let go. Now you see spawn point is connected to our spawn point variable, and it's pulling in the transform position of it. So it's pulling in this component's value, which is 15 on the x-axis. Great, let's go ahead and click play. If your pipes aren't spawning directly on your spawn point cube, it may be because your pipe prefab's local position is altering where it's actually showing up on the x-axis. You can see mine is working as expected, but to change yours and make sure it's working correctly, I'm going to stop the game, go into my pipe prefab one last time, left click on pipe, and just make sure these are zeroed out. To do that, just right click on your transform and left click on reset. Then I'll leave my pipe prefab to save it. Next, to add some height variety to our game, let's go back into our pipe spawner script. Back in our pipe spawner script, let's create a new float variable called spawn height. I'll click to the right of my current spawn time float variable and just space down once and type float spawn height. Let's also create a new method and call it spawn height as well. So I'll click below my spawn pipe method and I'll hit enter a couple times. Then I'll type void spawn height. Now inside our spawn height method, let's go up here and copy our spawn height variable. And I'll hit Controller Command C to copy it. Then I'll go back inside and paste it by hitting Controller Command V. Then type an equals sign at the end and the words Random.Range, followed by open and close parentheses. Inside these parentheses, we can determine the maximum and minimum values for any given spawn height. Other than that, it'll produce a totally random number within our range. To include decimal values, let's type -2.0f for our minimum height, and then a comma, and then 4.0f for the maximum height. The F after each of these numbers just tells Unity that this is a float value. Now to call our spawn height method, all we have to do is similar to what we did in our update method, and that is to copy our spawn height method's name, hitting Controller Command C on your keyboard, and paste it with Control or Command V on your keyboard, and then I'll hit a semicolon. This will call our spawn height method every single time that our if statement is true. So basically every 2 seconds. Now to use this new spawn height variable, let's double left click it to select it and hit Controller Command C to copy it. And what we want to do is in our vector 3, if you'll remember this is an X, Y, and Z value, we want to take the Y, which defines the height position, and highlight our spawn point.position.Y that we currently have and replace it with Controller Command V to paste in our spawn height. Height will change every single time we call spawn height method here. And that's it. Let's be sure to save and head back into Unity to test this out. I'll go ahead and click play, and we should see our pipes spawning at just totally random heights, different every single time, within the range that we set. So that's -2 as the minimum, so that might be 1 right there, and then 4 as the max. That means our player can always get over any of the pipes, and it won't completely block off the screen. Perfect. I'll go ahead and click stop. Finally, let's add even more randomness to our pipes by changing their direction. There are a few ways we could handle this, but an easy solution is to simply duplicate the current pipe prefab we have. Before we do though, let's create a new folder to keep our project organized. I'll right click on Assets, go up to Create, and left click on Folder. Let's rename this folder to Prefabs. Then we'll just take our current pipe and move it into our Prefabs folder. I'll double click to open that folder. Next, because we're about to create a new pipe prefab, let's rename the original. Since it comes out of the ground from the bottom of our player's screen, let's rename this one to bottom pipe. Perfect. Next, let's make sure it's selected, and to duplicate it, all we have to do is hit Control or Command D on your keyboard. You can see we now have 2 prefabs called bottom pipe. Let's select the one we just duplicated and change this from bottom pipe 1 to top pipe. And I'll remove the 1. Perfect. Now to make our top pipe look like it's hanging from the sky at the top of our player's view, let's double click on our top pipe prefab to open it up. With our top pipe prefab open, all we need to do to make this look like it's hanging down from the sky is left click to select our base object here, and where it says -10 in our transform, remove the negative so that it's +10 on the Y. Perfect. Now let's back out so we can save and head back into our pipe spawner script one last time. Because we now need to pull in 2 different prefabs, let's take the original pipe prefab and duplicate it once. So I'll select our pipe prefab variable, the whole thing, including the serialized field. Controller Command C on your keyboard to copy it. I'll space down 1 and Controller Command V to paste it. And because we can't have 2 variables with the same name, let's rename the original variable to bottom pipe prefab. And I'll go down to this other variable and just call it top pipe prefab. Just like that. Also, we're going to need an empty game object within our script here that can hold the current pipe direction that we want to spawn. To do this, I'll go right above our last float here, and I'll space down once and just type the word game object. Then I'll give it the name current pipe. Finally, we need to add one more method. We'll call this method pipe direction. I'll go just under our spawn height method here and type void pipe direction. Next, within our pipe direction method, we're going to generate a random number again, but this time we'll only want a 0 or a 1. 0 will spawn a bottom pipe and 1 will spawn a top pipe. To do this, let's just type int to create a new integer variable. Next, we just need to give it a name and we'll call it direction index. Then type equals, and then we'll type the words Random.Range again. Open and close parentheses, semicolon. Now inside our parentheses, let's type 0, 2. Unlike the random range we set up earlier in our spawn height method, integers exclude the max value that you set. Because we only want zeros or ones, an integer range of 0 to 2 will work. Next, let's use an if statement to take this value and determine which direction our pipe should spawn. I'll space down a couple times and type if, open and close parentheses, open and close curly braces. I'll double click on my direction index variable and hit Controller Command C to copy it, then Controller Command V to paste it. Then I'll hit a double equals sign, which is going to test whether or not this direction index is equal to something, and I'll make that something 0. If you're familiar with languages like C#, you may already know this, but a single equals sign, like we see up here, sets a variable's value. However, a double equals sign checks if the variable on the left is equal to the value on the right. In this case, we're obviously checking to see if direction index is equal to 0. If it is, we'll set the current pipe equal to the bottom pipe prefab. To To do that, I'm just going to go up to my current pipe game object that we created a second ago, hit Control or Command C to copy that, and I'll hit Control or Command V to paste it. And to set this current pipe equal to our bottom pipe prefab, all we have to do is hit equals and then go up to our bottom pipe prefab right here. You may have already noticed both of these are type game object, and because of that, that's going to work perfectly fine. So I'll double click on bottom pipe prefab, hit Control or Command C to copy it, then Control or Command V to paste it down here, and then I'll hit a semicolon to end this statement. Now, if it isn't equal to 0, we can tell our statement to do something else by going below these curly braces and just typing the word else. And then a new set of open and close curly braces, and I'll hit enter to space things out. Obviously, the only other option in this case, because we set our range between 0 and 2, is a 0 or a 1. So if it's a 1, we know we want to get our top pipe prefab. All we need to do is copy the statement we just created up here, Control or Command C, and then Control or Command V to paste it, and swap out this bottom pipe prefab to top. Perfect. And with that, our pipe direction method is complete. All we need to do now is copy it just like we did our spawn height method a second ago by hitting Control or Command C on your keyboard. And right below spawn height, we can space down a couple times and hit Control or Command V to paste pipe direction. Hit a semicolon here. Now, instead of our pipe prefab, which no longer exists, we actually want to grab this value, the current pipe variable. I'll hit Control or Command C to copy it, go back to the pipe prefab, double click on it, and hit Control or Command V to paste it. And that's it. Let's be sure to hit save and head back into Unity. Inside Unity, all we have to do is go back to our pipes game object here, and don't forget to sync these up. So bottom pipe prefab is looking for our bottom pipe prefab, obviously, in our folder here. So I'll left click and drag that in. And then the top pipe prefab is looking for the top pipe prefab. Perfect. All that's left now is to click play and start dodging some pipes. Nice, now our level is infinitely long. Of course, hitting pipes doesn't really do anything besides push our bird off the screen for now, but we'll fix that soon. We just got through building the most complex part of our game. Congrats on making it this far. In the next video, we'll add some collisions that destroy our bird if it hits a pipe or the ground. If you like this video, be sure to let me know by hitting that little thumbs up button down below. It's totally free and helps me out a bunch. As always, please leave any comments or questions in the section below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.